The plane, which was taking off from Dubai, was passing over the buildings in the city center. The giant jet was meters away from crashing in the city. The incident made us think that the technology that is developing day by day is starting to cause problems for safety. Flight 231 of Emirates is based on official accident reports and eyewitness accounts. December 20th, 2021, United Arab Emirates, Dubai. This wide-body Boeing 777 was preparing to carry passengers from Dubai to Washington, D.C. The plane was scheduled to take off at 2:25 a.m. for a 14-hour journey. As we mentioned in previous videos, there would be 4 pilots in the cockpit as it would be a long flight. 2 pilots would complete the takeoff and half of the journey. During the flight, they would switch tasks and hand over to the 2 pilots who had rested. The aircraft being prepared for pushback from Gate B27 was a 4-year-old Boeing 777-300ER with tail number A6EQI. The ER extended range in its name was due to its longer range compared to other 77s. This passenger jet is the largest passenger aircraft with twin engines. Compared to the Boeing 737, you can easily understand the difference in size. The aircraft weighs tons. The 0 to 100 km speed is only 6 seconds, and the huge engines are capable of generating 175,000 horsepower. With its fuel efficiency, range, and comfort, it is an aircraft type that many pilots dream of. Going back to the flight, the pushback of Flight 231 started. The pilots started the number 1 and 2 engines of the aircraft respectively. Emirates, the company that will operate the flight, has 120 of this aircraft type. Emirates is also the largest operator of Boeing 777s in the world. 354 passengers boarded the aircraft. The pilots were taxiing towards runway 30 for takeoff. The weather conditions were perfect for the flight. The sky was clear, visibility was good, and the wind was calm. The air temperature was 21 degrees. The pilots were doing their pre-flight checks. At 10 minutes past 3 o'clock, the pilots took clearance to enter and take off, and lined up at the beginning of the runway. From runway 30 right, they powered the engines and started accelerating. The pilots started to gain speed and reached a takeoff speed of 150 knots and 275 km per hour. From that moment on, they had also passed the V1 speed at which they could not abort the takeoff. Even though the takeoff speed was reached, the pilots did not take off. They continued to run on the runway. They reached a speed of 400 km per hour within seconds. They had reached the end of the runway. After using the entire runway, they finally cut the wheels and took off at a much higher speed than they should have. At 234 km per h at a speed of only 75 feet, about 25 meters up, the giant Boeing was flying over a residential area of buildings. The plane was just above the buildings. Although they were quite low, the pilots were not lifting the nose. On the contrary, they were lowering the nose. Their current speed was 260 knots. The plane started to give an overspeed warning. Realizing their mistake, the pilots raised the nose and started a steep climb after narrowly passing the buildings. They almost avoided a collision. They would have caused perhaps the biggest accident of recent times. The plane had given an overspeed warning due to the mistake made by the pilots. But instead of turning back, the crew continued the flight for 14 hours in their normal takeoff direction. Fortunately, they landed at Washington Airport 14 hours later without any problems. It was another big mistake for them to take the risk and continue the flight after the damage. The Boeing 777 was found to have reached speeds of up to 262 knots. After receiving an overspeed warning, the pilots should have landed at the airport from where they had taken off, checked the condition of the aircraft, and then continued the flight. Because in the takeoff configuration, with the flaps and slats open, the excessive speed could have caused structural damage. The aircraft was grounded and inspected for damage by the Emirates as soon as it returned from the US. So why didn't the pilots climb the aircraft as soon as they reached takeoff speed? Why did they wait until the end of the runway to gain speed? The pilots had not set the autopilot to 4,000 feet, the first altitude they would climb to before takeoff, and the autopilot had been left at 0 by the pilots on the previous flight. The pilots should have realized this during the instrument cockpit check before takeoff, but they missed that the altitude was at 0, or maybe they didn't care. There is a flight director in front of the pilots, which is their reference. The pilots followed this flight director during takeoff. We can understand the flight director more clearly as follows. For an aircraft in level flight, the pink bars on the flight director are centered on the horizon line. When the aircraft starts to climb, the pink arrows go above the horizon, calling the aircraft to a high angle. In short, it is an auxiliary system that gives pilots ideal instructions such as ascending and descending. The pilots were completely focused on this pink bar while they were gaining speed on the runway. The pilots did not take off because the flight director told the pilots that the aircraft had to be on the ground. After all, the autopilot was at 0. Even after takeoff, this pink needle pointed downwards for their altitude to be 0, and the pilots reflexively tried to nose down after takeoff. Emirates made a notice to its pilots to prevent this situation from happening again. The notice was a warning that the pilots in the company should not set the altitude on autopilot to 0 after landing. This statement revealed how inattentive the incident was, because there were 4 pilots in the cockpit, and none of them noticed this situation during takeoff. In addition, while it is standard procedure to check the altitude on the mode control panel several times before takeoff, the pilots somehow skipped this item on the checklist. The altitude given by the air traffic controller, 4,000 feet, was also not entered by the pilots. They blindly followed the flight director aiming for 0 feet. According to company policy, Emirates uses advanced automation systems almost to the fullest extent. Some companies in the United States believe that this dulls the pilot's ability to fly the aircraft manually, and therefore apply the opposite methods. Another aspect of this is that since wide-body airplanes mostly travel long distances, wide-body pilots take off and land less frequently, and spend most of their days with the aircraft's systems. Short-leg pilots take off and land more frequently, so they have even less confidence in the systems than long-leg pilots, and can be more careful when landing and taking off. It was obvious that the pilots were not controlling the speed during takeoff. No matter what, when the takeoff speed came, they should not focus on the flight director. After the incident, it was said that all 4 of the pilots were fired. Just 4 years ago, another 777 belonging to Emirates had an accident due to improper use of automation and a fire broke out on the plane. A firefighter who came to intervene in the fire after the accident lost his life. Fortunately, in this incident, while there could have been very high losses, the danger was overcome without even being injured as a result of the incident.